Joining us tonight here in our In the Turn interview, longtime voice of the Motor Racing Network and general manager at Berlin Speedway up in Michigan. We are joined by the one and only newly retired, happily retired, I'm sure, Jeff Striegle. Jeff, welcome to the show. How are you tonight?
I am good. I'm glad to be with you. And at this point, I can say, Miles, yes, I'm happily retired. Now, that may change as we move closer into the spring, and I know my friends and former colleagues are getting ready to go to Daytona and Phoenix, because like you, I'm going to be buried in snow up here, and it's going to be something that I'm going to have to transition into.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We do know that Michigan gets a lot of snow here in the next couple of months, as we do here up in Massachusetts as well. But it's always great to hear you're on the call, and I know you're going to enjoy a little bit of downtime, but let's jump right into things, and one of the first questions I always like to ask is, how did you catch the racing bug, Jeff?
Man, how about listening to it on the radio? I was probably 8 years old when my dad brought me into the backyard. We sat at a picnic table. He's got his transistor radio, you know, the one with the antenna, and he's pointing it in the air. And the next thing you know, I'm listening to the Indianapolis 500. And I was a fan at that moment, just the sound and the speed that you could hear through the radio. I was captivated. It wasn't very long after that, Miles, and I made my first trip to the Berlin Raceway, sat in the grandstands with my dad. I was hooked, and I've been a big, big motorsports fan ever since.
You mentioned Berlin Speedway, obviously general manager up there, is somebody involved at our local short track here at Seekonk. We know that the local Action Weekly really is what hooks us. Talk to us about some of the things and some of your time now at Berlin Speedway.
Well, it's going to be, I just have a philosophy with the team here that we want to make Berlin Raceway better tomorrow than what it is today. We worked very hard at making it a clean, family-friendly entertainment venue that puts on some of the biggest and best shows anywhere in the country. And, we're ready to release our schedule here coming up this weekend. It's going to be highlighted with, stock cars and sprint cars and super modifieds. It's a passion for me. I'm just driven by trying to make this facility the best facility in the country, or at least the best facility that it can be. And I'm going to, do everything in my power to do that, and I'll stop short of nothing to try to make that happen.
So certainly we'll have your hands full here coming up for the 2025 season. Let's jump back and talk a little bit about 2024. And obviously it was about, I want to say, early summer that you announced that you were going to be stepping away from the broadcast booth. And quite a season to wrap up with Joey Logano taking home the Cup Series championship. Talk to us about 2024 and the decision for you to retire.
It wasn't an easy one, that's for sure. I felt like, I think like anybody, you want to go out on your own terms. I didn't want to be asked to step aside or for them to come to me and say, we're going to probably pull the contract. We don't want to renew you the following year. I mean, I've been with them for almost 3 decades, almost 30 years. And, I felt like I could still do this job at a high level. But I also am well aware of the fact that, my best days of broadcasting are probably behind me. And there's a lot of things you miss. I mean, everybody that travels, they own race cars, or they're a big fan that travel the country, or they work in the sport. You know how much time you give up. And you're not home. You're not home for family. You're not home for friends. You're not home for a lot of things. And for me, 3 decades of missing out on that, I just figured, the time was right. We live right close to Lake Michigan. We've got a boat that I rarely use. Summers here in Michigan, like you have, are spectacular. I miss a lot of that. So I guess I just felt like it was the right time. I haven't regretted that decision, but again, this is the end of the season anyway, and I was always off at this point, so it may hit me a little harder, when we get into February, March, and April. But then again, I'm going to sink my passion and my drive into the track here and just try to focus on that and look back on what has been an amazing journey.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about your time with MRN and talking about almost 3 decades. You've gotten to work with some of the great voices of NASCAR. Barney Hall, Joe Moore, Rusty Wallace, Alex Hayden is there as well now. Talk to us about some of those guys and some of the things that really stick with you to this day, working with them and learning from them.
Well, you just mentioned, members of what I consider my extended family. We spend more time with those, the brothers and sisters, with the Motor Racing Network than we do with our own family. Alex is like a brother to me. Joe Moore is still like a brother to me. I'm glad you brought him up. He's a dear friend. I'm going down to see him here in about another 2 weeks. My wife and I are going to head to Key West, and that's where Joe is retired. And so I'll go down and see him. I'm going to miss Rusty and all of his antics. I mean, he's just an amazing individual, crazy, wide-open individual. The same person that we see, growing up and watching him race. He's just wide open all of the time. Mike Bagley, Dave Moody, Steve Post, that list goes on and on. Kim Kuhn, who is now, working with NBC and doing a great job there. Eli Gold, Alan Bestwick, and you mentioned, of course, the legendary Barney Hall. They're just like family to me, and I'm going to miss them dearly. But, we all made the pact that, Phoenix was not goodbye. It is just, I'll see you later. And when that happens, I don't know, but I'm certainly not going to write those individuals off because they've meant a lot to me over my career.
Let's jump back in time. Go back to your first jumping in and getting involved with MRN. What do you remember about some of the first couple of broadcasts that you had with MRN?
I was terrible. I was terrible, thinking they're never going to call me back. I thought my audition was bad, and I didn't expect them to even call back. They did. I went to Texas Motor Speedway and worked Turn 4. My first broadcast was a truck series event, and I thought I was terrible. I called the trucks cars all night long, and they kept telling me during the commercials, Jeff, these are trucks. They're not cars. It's truck links, not car links. And I'm like, yep, I got it. And I'd go back on the radio, and I'd say, Hornaday leads Mike Skinner by 4 car lengths, and the commercial would come up, and they'd be like, Jeff. I'm like, I get it. I know what you're going to say. I'm trying. And I figured, they're never going to call me back. I'm never going to get a second event, but they did. And, all of us with the Motor Racing Network have one common goal, and that is to not be the weak link in the chain. And you work very hard to try to make sure you're not that person because, like you said, Barney Hall, Bestwick, Joe Moore, Eli Gold, when you're on a broadcast with those amazing talents, the last thing you want to do is be the person that brings the broadcast down. So everybody that wore the blue MRN shirt and carried the microphone knew that they had to be on their game, prepared, and ready to go, and I tried to do that year after year.
You mentioned Alan Bestwick, and he was one that joined us at Seekonk this year, and obviously for the Boston Louis, and one of the ultimate professionals of the sport, and spoke with him last week, just an all-around great guy. Bestwick has done fantastic work for many years. He's over at Indianapolis Motor Speedway now. Do you get to talk to Alan often?
I talk to him periodically, Miles. He was here a couple years ago with SRX, and certainly he and I are friends, and we will text back and forth periodically. The compliment that I'll pay to Alan is the fact that before I ever went to the Motor Racing Network and I was doing stuff here at the track, I thought if there was somebody that I wanted to emulate or be as close to, it was Alan. I mean, he is absolutely mistake-free, so smooth in his delivery. His preparation is unlike anybody in the sport. And I thought, man, if I could be anything at all, and I'm not, if I could be anything at all like Alan Bestwick, then I would be happy. But he was the guy that, of all of the people that we've mentioned, he was the one that I wanted to most be like. I don't think I ever accomplished that goal, but that was the goal going in.
Well, I can say as somebody who's listened to your broadcasts for many years, I think there's many similarities, and I've always enjoyed your call on the broadcasts as well over the years.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
No problem. So let's talk. You've been behind the wheel a little bit as well. I know, obviously, like many of us, the story kind of transitions to behind a microphone. But talk to us about how you got involved racing back in the day.
It's kind of a crazy story. I was actually at the track with my dad here at Berlin, and it's a low-budget, open wheel. They look a little bit like a super modified. They look a little bit like an Indy car. They look like an Indy car with a super modified wing on the cage. And I said to my dad, man, we ought to go buy one of these cars. And he said, no, we're not going to do that. I think I was 22 years old at the time. I just, Miles, wanted to wear a helmet badly. And so I went out and bought a motorcycle. And it wasn't but 2 months after I owned that motorcycle, my phone rang. It was my dad saying, if you sell that motorcycle, let's go buy a race car. You're going to be safer behind the wheel of a race car than you are on that bike. And I said, Dad, done deal. And I sold the bike, bought the car, and again, we were terrible for 2 years, absolutely terrible. And then, we got a little funding behind us, and we were able to buy a better race car. And we went out and ran for, I guess, a decade, 10 years, won some races, won a championship along the line. And the cost of the sport's going up. My family is growing, and so I decided, I've had my fill of this, had my fun, did what I wanted to do, and I was ready to step aside.
And you had a couple of celebrity drivers run for you, too, over your time as an owner, per se. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, when I got out of that, it was far removed, and we decided that, we wanted to build a car and race it here at Berlin Raceway. We started with a pavement modified at Berlin. And I was already into Motor Racing Network, so I was friends already with Johnny Benson. I was friends with A.J. Allmendinger and Mike Skinner, and I invited, A.J. and Mike to come up and run our car. They both did. They both won in the car. That led to great financial backing. We were able to build a couple of super late models that we ran here, and we actually pulled Benson out of retirement. And I know a lot of your listeners up there see Johnny behind the wheel of a super modified. He was actually retired, and we talked him out of retirement and said, we're going to build you a super late model, come and race it. He did. We had success, and then he's like, you know what, guys, I'm going to leave you because I want to build a super and start running with, the super modified. So, yeah, we've had a lot of really good people, a lot of incredibly talented people behind the wheel of our cars over the years, and that's something that I always look back on and be very proud of.
Now, mentioning our MRN, obviously, and obviously Johnny Benson as well, but with MRN, you guys are pretty much a family, as you mentioned, week in, week out, track to track, and, we see you guys all load out. You might go to a restaurant here or there. Talk to us about some of your favorite cities to visit with the team when you go traveling for the 36 race weeks a year. Obviously, you guys have a portion of those, but talk to us about some of your favorite spots in the sport.
Oh, man. See, now we don't have enough time for that. I got to tell you this. We started something maybe 10, 12, 15 years ago where, the guys before me, nothing against what they did, but, they would go to a restaurant and they go back to the hotel. They go to a restaurant, go back to the hotel. It's like, this is boring. I can't do this. And so we decided that no matter where we go, we were going to turn that trip into an event, go someplace that, if you're going to L.A., don't you have to go to the top of the Hollywood Hills and see it? Don't you have to go to Venice Beach and see it? Don't you have to go here and there? And we did that everywhere we went, whether it was Martinsville, Pocono, Homestead. When we go to Homestead, you'll see, for anybody that might follow us, you're going to see that our time is spent in the Keys. We're going to go to Key Largo. We're going to get on Wave Runners, and we're going to go bust around the Gulf. I would probably put Daytona at the top of that list. The Ponce Inlet area just south of Daytona has some great, restaurants and bars. But every place, Miles, we went, we would find something to do and turn it into, I guess a real good example of this is how many people can think of a lake in the middle of the desert, just outside of Phoenix, Arizona. Well, there's two of them there, and they're absolutely the most beautiful places on the planet. And we will go, like we did 2 weeks ago, and rent a pontoon boat. And whoever wants to go goes. We fill a cooler with, beer or water, soda. We fill the bags full of snacks, and we just get on that boat and we just idle around this lake and just take it all in. So that is something that I love calling races, but the time that we spent away from the racetrack is truly unforgettable.
Silly season's been heating up here, obviously. Riley Herbst announced for the Cup Series coming up. What do you look for in 2025 with some of these announcements coming out?
I think one of them, you got to look at, I'm curious to see how this whole thing with 2311 and NASCAR, the lawsuit between those two and Front Row Motorsports, I'm interested to see how that plays out. I mean, that could change the landscape of NASCAR as we know it. I'm not going to speculate on what could happen or what happens at this because we just don't know. But I think that's going to be the unfortunate headline story during the off season. I think it's going to be this. It's going to be going to the racetrack, and there's no Stewart-Haas Racing Ford Mustangs. I mean, that was a four-car team. That was one of the premier teams in our sport. They're gone. What can some of the young, talented race car drivers do next year? I'm always interested in that. I mean, that Logano and Blaney and Hamlin and the top names of our sport are going to be back, and they're going to contend for wins, and they're going to contend for championships. But I'm always looking, Miles, for who is going to be the next Jeff Gordon, that's tough to do. Those are big shoes to fill. But who is going to be the next star of NASCAR at its highest level? Is it going to be a Carson Hocevar? Maybe. Is it going to be Tyler Reddick, William Byron? Maybe. But I think that's why we line them up and go racing every weekend, is because we just don't know.
Absolutely. Can't let you get out of here without talking about New England a little bit. Obviously, not many trips for you up here with the Motor Racing Network, obviously, over the last couple of years. But do you have any favorite memories from Loudon, from New Hampshire over the years?
Sure I do. The first time I ever worked there was in Turn 3, and it was one of the first Cup races that I ever did with the Motor Racing Network, so I was a little bit nervous. Again, you're working with Eli Gold and Joe and Barney and Alan. I don't remember who all was on the broadcast, but I get out to the Turn 3 platform, and you're at the end of the back straightaway. And as I look down to Turn 2, I'm going to call them down the back straightaway, off 2 to 3. I'm looking through, diagonally a chain link fence. And it's like, okay, I can't even see the cars. I mean, I'm getting ready to call them for one of the first times on a Cup race on the Motor Racing Network, and I'm just thinking I can't see them well, but yet I also know that there were some great talented individuals before me, and they probably didn't complain, so I'm certainly not in. There's nothing I can do about it anyway. But I just remember that day getting up there nervous and ready to go, and I kind of take a look around, and I'm like, okay, well, I can't even see them. But I spent the afternoon making them up and doing the best I could with what I actually could see. That and the food. I mean, when you talk about great places, Barney Hall always had a great restaurant. The name is going to escape me, but it was a lobster house.
Macris, right down on 106.
There you go. That's exactly right. And I remember him saying to everybody, before anybody could say we were going to McDonald's, he's like, this is where we're going to go. And everybody's like, heck yeah. So I was along for the ride. And I went there and I thought, man, this was a great place to eat. And I think, what did we do? I don't remember. We did it for a while. I think I went to New Hampshire maybe 5 times. But that was always the staple. That's where we had to go.
Absolutely. Macris, Richard Petty still goes there on, race weekend, and it's such a great spot. That's where Loudon the Lobster comes from as well now these days. So
I'm not surprised.
One more plug, too, for Berlin Raceway. You mentioned the schedule is coming out this week. People listening all over the country want to learn more about Berlin Raceway. How can they do that?
BerlinRaceway.com, or better yet, search Berlin Raceway on Facebook, and I am going to say hello to all of the super modified fans up there in the great New England states. We run a super modified show here on July 11 and 12. I literally was just on the phone with one of your neighbors, Mike Ordway Jr., and I was talking with Dave Schulich about our event, just trying to make our event the biggest and best it can possibly be. And I know there's some super guys up there probably listening to the show right now going, yeah, I know, we're thinking about coming to Berlin. And my hope is that they will, because we believe in the super modifieds. I personally love the super modifieds, and it's one of the biggest super shows of the year, and that's July 11 and 12. But again, you search Berlin Raceway on Facebook. We're going to release our schedule on Saturday, and love to see some of you folks make the trip over here. Great camping here at the track. We're only a few minutes away from Lake Michigan, which is spectacular. So if somebody's looking for a vacation thought, West Michigan might be the place to be this summer.
Well, I haven't made race plans yet for the summer, so there's always that option to make my way out to Berlin Raceway for sure.
Yeah, I'd love to have you here, and obviously if you decide to make your way out here, you're going to call me and let me know so we can take care of you and all of the race fans that would elect to make. It's not lost on me. I think it's, 14 hours, 16-hour drive, depending on where you're coming from over there, but I'd like to think it's worth every mile that it takes to get here.
I've driven from here to Bristol, here to North Wilkesboro, so the driving isn't a big thing at all for me, that's for sure. So 14 hours is nothing.
Perfect. Bring a couple of super modified fans with you. We see them. That's one of the cool things about that weekend is you walk through the parking lot and you look at the license plates and you see New York and you see Massachusetts and you see Vermont. And that's one of those things, as we wrap up, I said to you to start with, that's the passion and drive that I have. And that's going to, continue to, just grow as we work through the winter and get ready for 2025.
Absolutely. Been joined here in our In the Turn interview, sponsored tonight by Modern Auto Body in Brockton, by longtime voice of the Motor Racing Network and general manager of Berlin Raceway out in Michigan, Jeff Striegle, here on the show.